China's exports plunged 7.5%.
Chinese second quarter GDP growing at the slowest pace since 2020.
China's latest trade figures are out and they paint a mixed picture of how the world's second biggest economy.
Chinese economy, which have been growing rapidly from last couple of decades, have finally slowed down. China's economy, which have been growing at the rate of 10 to 12% per year, have been reduced to 4.5 to 5%. And many economists believe that this rate will only slow down further in coming years. Despite being a developed country and world's second biggest economy, China has been enjoying economic growth at 8 to 9% on average from last 2 to 3 decades. Whereas others developed economies such as USA or Europe merely have growth rate of 2 to 3%. But recently, Chinese economy have seen significant slowdown in their economic growth, and analysts believe that this might be the new norm for China. So what are the reasons which cause such slowdown? Let's talk about them. It all starts in 2020 with the rise of coronavirus. Just like the rest of the world, China also implement lockdown in its major cities. While the rest of the world moves on, abandon the aggressive lockdown policies and open their economies for business, China stick to its strict lockdown policy and only relaxed in the end of the last year, which caused overall slowdown in its economy due to lockdown its factories, and business remained shut down for infinite period, which not only reduced its exports but also domestic consumption as well. Many small business shut down. Even large corporations suffered a lot. Large protests were witnessed all over the country due to this infinite lockdown. Even in some cases, the entire cities were shut down if authorities found only few hundred COVID cases. One protest which caught much attention by the world was protest at Foxconn, a technology giant which produced iPhones for Apple, where workers of the factory protest because they were asked to stay in factory premises for months and not allowed to go back to their homes. Finally, after 2 long years of strict lockdown, China finally decided to abandon this policy and completely open their economy for business, and for a time being its economy recover very rapidly, but soon it unable to keep up its pace and start slowing down again. Turns out there are other factors which are not letting its economy to grow at full potential. For years, one of the major fuel for Chinese GDP growth was government spending on infrastructure. Chinese government spend billions and billions of dollars to build new dams, roads, railway lines, power distribution lines, and much more. This government spending helps China to increase their economic growth at rapid pace for a long period of time. And at one stage, some of these projects have become less necessary and just only built to boost their GDP. These massive infrastructure project comes at the cost of government borrowing. And since the Chinese government are borrowing money from a long period of time to fund these projects, overall debt of the country has reached at $23 trillion, which is almost 279% of debt to GDP ratio. Due to this massive debt, Chinese government has finally decided move from this approach to more stable one by promoting exports, personal consumption, and innovation-driven growth. Since the government won't be spending massively on infrastructure, now many analysts believe that the Chinese economy won't be growing at the rate in which it were growing in the past. Another reason of slowdown in Chinese economy is property crisis in China. Chinese property sector won't be able to rise after COVID-19 and saw a significant decrease in its prices all over the country. China's property sector has over the past 2 years been thrust into a severe debt crisis, initially triggered by government moves to rein in ballooning debt, with many developers defaulting on payments as they struggle to sell apartments and raise funds. Evergrande, Shimao, and Wandas are some of the major names which went bankrupt recently. With the lack of government measures to support the sector by less aggressive monetary and fiscal policies, investors in Chinese property are more skeptical about the market. Chinese property represent the major portion in the country GDP. In the broad economy, official statistics show that the real estate sector accounts for 6 to 7% of China's GDP. But the entire footprint of real estate activity is much larger. Analysts believe that the real estate sector and associated activities accounted for 29% of China's GDP. Chinese private property developers have borrowed massive amount of money through debt. It is estimated that China's real estate developers have debt worth 12% of the nation's gross domestic product, and 186 listed developers shows that about 48% of total borrowing is held by companies that either already defaulted on public bonds during the 2021 to 2022 property rout or are at significant risk of missing repayment, according to the research. If these companies default on their debt, China may face economic crisis like USA faces in 2008, and Chinese economy may go in limbo for a long period of time. And on the other hand, Chinese public also face serious consequence, since it is estimated that around 70% of Chinese people household wealth is in property. For decades, the USA and China have engaged in bilateral trade, fostering economic interdependence and benefiting both nations. China's rise as a global manufacturing hub and its expanding middle class created immense opportunities for American companies, which sought access to China's vast consumer market. Conversely, Chinese exports filled the shelves of American stores, providing affordable products to American consumers. However, the trade relationship between the USA and China in recent years has experienced heightened tensions, marked by trade disputes and escalating tariffs. The substantial trade deficit USA has with China has been a persistent concern. American industries and policymakers argue that China's trade practices such as currency manipulation, intellectual property theft, and unfair subsidies have contributed to the deficit and resulted in job losses in the USA. In recent years, USA has imposed heavy tariffs on Chinese goods imported by USA from China. These tariffs, which are levied as a form of protectionist measure, have had substantial implications for Chinese economy, and many analysts believe that these measures will help Chinese competitors such as India, South Korea, Taiwan, and other countries will capture Chinese goods market in USA. Also, on the other hand, Chinese exporters face increased costs and reduced access to the U.S. market, leading to decreased export volumes and potential job losses. As a result of the tariffs, some companies have started to reevaluate their supply chains and shift production away from China to other countries. This trend could lead to long-term changes in the global trade landscape, impacting China's position as a manufacturing hub and potentially benefiting other countries. China has responded to U.S. tariffs by imposing its own retaliatory measures, targeting U.S. goods. This has resulted in a tit-for-tat escalation, further exacerbating the trade tension and causing additional economic harm to both nations. If these measures wasn't enough, USA has implemented a series of bans and restrictions on Chinese technology companies, citing national security concerns and allegations of unfair trade practices. USA has expressed concerns that Chinese tech companies, particularly those involved in 5G infrastructure, pose potential risks to national security. The fear stems from the potential for unauthorized access, data breaches, and espionage, as these companies may have close ties to the Chinese government. These bans have severely affected Chinese tech companies' access to the U.S. market and disrupted their global expansion plans. Companies like Huawei and ZTE, which have been targeted by U.S. bans, have experienced setbacks in their operations, supply chains, and revenue streams. It's also affected their ability to collaborate with U.S.-based companies and access crucial technologies. Such bans on Chinese tech companies have further strained relations between the USA and China, exacerbating the existing trade tension. These actions have led to retaliatory measures from China, resulting in a broader escalation of economic and political disputes. The geopolitical ramifications extend beyond the bilateral relationship. The issue of Taiwan stands as one of the most sensitive and contentious factors contributing to the political tension between USA and China. The complex relationship between the three entities involves strategic interests, differing political ideologies, and historical factors. China considers Taiwan as a part of its territory and upholds the One China policy. It seeks to isolate Taiwan diplomatically and discourages other nations from recognizing Taiwan as an independent state, whereas the USA maintains unofficial relations with Taiwan. The USA views Taiwan as an important ally in the Indo-Pacific region, contributing to its regional security objectives. The presence of U.S. military forces in the region, arms sales to Taiwan, and defense cooperation have been sources of tension with China, which sees such actions as interference in its internal affairs. The tension can affect economic relations between the USA and China even further. All these factors together are affecting the Chinese economy to perform at their full potential. China is currently facing several demographic challenges that have significant implications for its future economic and social development. China has one of the fastest aging populations in the world. The one-child policy, which was in place from 1979 to 2015, has resulted in a rapidly aging population and a shrinking workforce. The proportion of elderly people aged 65 and above is increasing, while the working age population is declining. This puts pressure on the pension system and healthcare services, as well as impacts economic productivity. The aging population has implications for consumption patterns in China. Older individuals tend to have different spending habits and preferences compared to younger demographics. They may spend less on discretionary items and more on healthcare, retirement savings, and essential goods and services. This shift in consumption patterns can impact industries such as retail, entertainment, and travel, which rely heavily on consumer spending. All these could lead to labor shortages in certain industries and sectors, potentially hampering productivity and economic development. To mitigate these effects, the Chinese government has been implementing various measures, such as raising the retirement age, encouraging extended employment, and promoting private pensions. Additionally, efforts are being made to boost productivity through technological advancements and automation. Chinese stock market has been underperformer in current year, whereas other Asian markets has outshined Chinese market by large margin. Markets such as Japanese stock market has been all-time high and surpassed the level last seen 32 years ago in 1989. Similarly, Indian stock market is consistently among top performer in recent years, and foreign investors are considering it alternative investment destination as compared to China. With weak yuan and slowing economy indicators, investor confidence is shaking from China growth story. However, all is not lost for China yet. Despite all these challenges, China GDP is still growing at pretty decent pace, which is higher than many other developed economies. China has already achieved much. It has become the second biggest economy in the world in just a span of 4 decades, and almost done the impossible by lifting 770 million people out of poverty. With GDP of $17 trillion and forex reserves of more than $3 trillion, China is still in a very strong position to save its economy from going into recession and remains an economic powerhouse for next century. In fact, saying that Chinese economy is done with growth is not correct. It would be more accurate by saying that the Chinese economy is going from transition period from producing copycat products and inflating its GDP through expensive infrastructure projects to more technology-advanced products and becoming a leader in the field of technology.